welcome to the latest episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is Professor Ara Darzi, or Lord Darzi, as he is sometimes known. Ara Darzi is an academic surgeon and holds the Paul Hamlin Chair of Surgery at Imperial College in London. He's also the co-director of the Institute of Global Health Innovation. His background is fascinating, being born in Baghdad and going to medical school in the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland before completing his training in the UK and starting his rise through the ranks, initially as an NHS surgeon in the Central Middlesex Hospital, and then taking on the chair in Imperial. In 2006, Ara undertook a review of healthcare in London, and this was probably what set him on the path to many consultative and policy-making efforts in the years that followed. In 2007, Gordon Brown asked him to join his government of all talents, and so he entered the House of Lords as a Labour peer, but subsequently resigned from the Labour side and has served as an independent peer ever since. His academic career is quite outstanding, having published more than 2,000 papers in many journals, including the very best, such as the New England Journal and Nature. Since his time in government, Ara has become a global figure in terms of healthcare policy and in particular in the field of healthcare innovation. Recently, he has become recognized as a main player in the Fleming Institute, where he has raised an extraordinary amount of money towards the effort to reduce antimicrobial resistance to antibiotics. Because his career is, shall we say, most unusual in comparison to the average surgeon, I decided to split this into two interviews. The first will hear today and take us up to the point of his ministerial appointment, and the second interview will follow 2 weeks later and consider his life and efforts since that time. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can get notifications of further episodes, and I'm sure you will want to comment about some of the interviews with Lord Darzi. So without further ado, let's go across and hear the interview with Professor Darzi. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives. Welcome to the latest episode of Surgeons' Lives, which has that little strapline that says stuff that matters. It's great to see you. And let me start by asking you to start for other people, to give a little background in your life and early life and career by starting with the words, I was born in.
Thank you, John. Lovely to see you. You haven't lost your touch. I was born in Baghdad from an Armenian family. I think certainly my great-grandmother was one of the survivors from the, or a descendant from, I'm a descendant of a survivor of the Armenian genocide during the Ottoman Empire days, 1915. And so I was born in Baghdad, and I went to school there, and then went to a secondary school, high school, we would have called it in those days, very American. Actually, historically, it was run by the Jesuits, and so I did my high school there, and then I obviously needed the grades. I mean, I was brought up in a family where the principle was education, education, education. It's interesting, this strapline hit me later, three or four decades later, with Tony Blair talking about education, education, education. So anyhow, so the day I finished and I got my baccalaureate exams, I applied for a number of medical school, and it was the preference of my mother that I go in Ireland because it was cleaner, nicer, less challenging I don't know what she was thinking of. I will end up doing there, but there we are. So I ended up in Dublin, out of all places, and that obviously I was very fortunate because as a result of that, I met you, John.
Some years later, some years later. But you went to the Royal College of Surgeons like a lot of overseas people.
Yeah, I went to the Royal College of Surgeons, which was a great place in St. Stephen's Green, and it was actually exciting for a number of reasons. It wasn't just the medical school and the curriculum. It was my first exposure to, a multinational college, which had, if I'm correct, 2/3 would have been from overseas and about a third would have been local Irish recruits. And that gave me an amazing exposure to many, many friends and colleagues from Scandinavia, from the Middle East, from the Gulf region specifically. I remember meeting some wonderful young men and women as well, actually, from Qatar and Kuwait and those places. So it was and also the US, by the way. There were
Yeah.
many colleagues of mine in my class who would have come from the US. I'm not sure whether the motive there was to, have a university elsewhere in a different country, or they didn't get in where they were and they came to Ireland. But we had a fantastic, I remember fondly my undergraduate years. It was great fun and hard work combined. When that's the only way you can tolerate Ireland, considering how miserable the weather would have been.
Well, plus the fact that Ireland in those days was not a wealthy country. It was a very poor country. It was pre-Celtic Tiger days.
But they were exceptionally nice and kind people. You could have been as poor as you may mention it to be, but they were nice, they were hospitable, they were welcoming, and there weren't many people like us in the 1970s who landed in Ireland, but historically the college
Yes.
Recruit many from overseas.
Well, what was the plan then? Did you have if I'd stopped you on the street in your final year of medical school and said, so what's the big plan?
The plan was to get the exams and get the degree, get the passport to practice, and obviously that was the most important thing at the time. When I finished, obviously you follow the footsteps of many of those before you, so you had to do some house jobs, and I decided to do those in Dublin. In those days, I worked in St. Lawrence's Hospital, which we used to call the Richmond Hospital.
Yeah.
And we have two in Royal College of Surgeons. There was that, and obviously Jervis Street. And so I did my house jobs then with a very distinguished colorectal surgeon at the time. In actual fact, that's really how I ended up being a colorectal surgeon. He was a chap called Tony Cleary, he was a remarkable man, actually. He was obviously a very gifted surgeon, but the only problem with him as a surgeon, he only had a regard to the colon and the rectum. Nothing else mattered in the abdomen. But he was a master in what he did. He was very entertaining. And
Yes.
One of the things I remember about him, I don't know what your audience would be, but obviously a rectal examination is part of any physician examining you, but he would never wear a glove. He used to wear these little condoms that used to go on his finger. And the thing with Tony Cleary, though, I remember, that was for me, I was taken back by that because I've never seen that before.
I think a lot
the problem
were.
he was also a sailor, and he had some big hands and big fingers. And the problem with the condom finger glove was it only came to his middle phalanx, really. It didn't reach all the way below. So he had this terrible habit of doing rectal examinations and then removing the glove and then wiping it on the back of the white coat of the medical students. And so we always had to go and clean up by the end of the clinic. So that, there were very fond memories of a very, very brilliant surgeon.
I think I can safely say that despite the fact that you're internationally famous and have a litany of titles in one thing or another, that's possibly the most disgusting story I've had in all of the 50 plus podcasts we've done.
It's part of life. I mean, these are the things you remember about people. In
Exactly.
actual fact,
Yeah.
it anchors in your mind of certain things were done in those days, which are very different than they are
Oh,
today.
for sure. I actually remember being at one of those tutorials that Tony Cleary used to do, and him allowing somewhere between 6 and 10 people to do a rectal examination on the same patient to feel a tumor. I mean, and he was a hunter as well, if I recall correctly. He used to go deer hunting. Mayo
He
Clinic
did,
trained
yeah.
guy, remarkable guy. So there you were.
He was also a sailor.
Yeah, yeah,
He
he's
was a
fine.
fantastic. He had one of the GP 14, 15, whatever it was called.
Yes,
He was
yeah.
quite active in sailing.
So, and there were some other remarkable individuals around there at the time. Of course, both of us, our mutual friend and colleague of remarkable ability, David Boucher Hayes, was
Yeah.
quite a figure at that time.
I worked for him. I worked for Professor Hayes, as we used to call him in those days. He was obviously the professor of surgery, and it's interesting because when I qualified, that was just following the time when there were David Boucher Hayes was appointed as the professor,
Yeah.
and there was another disgruntled surgeon there who was also, I remember doing one of my attachments to in my undergraduate years, who was also called a professor. He was Lynch, Professor Lynch. Remember him?
Garode Lynch.
Harold Lynch, absolutely, and he did not get the chair. So there was always that was an introduction to me on the politics and the animosities between colleagues. I mean, David didn't care about it; he was the professor, and I must say he was a he was a very gifted guy in many ways. He was very empowering. He was an amazing intellect. He could stand on his feet and give an unbelievable speech without any sets of notes. That was for me a remarkable thing. How could he do that? I mean, and he also thought, sometimes we all thought he's a bit odd, but he always thought beyond the box. There's no question about it.
Totally. Yeah.
And if you remember in the days where towards the end of, I mean, I'm really going now a few years ahead when I ended up working for him as the senior house officer, also a registrar, I think, for a short period of time. I worked for Joe Deasy, who was another colorectal surgeon, very different than Tony Cleary, but and again, a remarkable surgeon. I just say he was a very serious man, but really attention to detail was phenomenal. And David was obviously the professor at the time, and he's the guy who really introduced me to the basics of research,
Yeah.
and understanding why research should be part of and I should seriously think about doing a postgraduate degree. And for whatever reason, by the way, after finishing my time with him, I would have loved to do my thesis with him because obviously that's my college, but I ended up getting a job in the Meath and Adelaide hospitals. And that, to be fair, opened up an amazing opportunity where I met the likes of Frank Keane and Arthur Tanner, and I ended up doing my PhD with Professor Keane.
Yeah, and which is where we met.
Yeah.
I remember coming back from the UK and where I'd been in Leeds, and I started with Frank Keane as the senior registrar, and I remember Frank saying to me, yeah, you need to help me with this research business because, we got this lithotripter thing, and I'm not sure what we should do with it. And I have this research fellow, and I'm not sure what he should be doing. Could you go find him? And I've always told people over the years that I eventually tracked you down in a very dark room with a little ultrasound screen over in the corner, and this clicking noise going on. And this was you sat in a corner merrily lithotripsing the gallstones of a woman who was in the middle of the room,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
You know, we ended up doing a bunch of things on lithotripsy at that stage. And if I recall correctly, one of the conversations we had was that you were you were thinking of pursuing a career in the United States. At that point, I think you had a green card, if I recall correctly, or in other words, the ability to go, and you were tossing up, you know, should I go, should I stay, should I go, should I stay?
Yeah. I mean, listen, good. That's a good reflection actually at the time. I mean, in Ireland, there weren't positions of both postgraduate training or consultant jobs, however good you would have been, because there wasn't even enough jobs for the Irish graduates coming through. So the idea we're going to be, and these are very, very different times. The idea that you can actually go through the whole training scheme and find yourself without a obviously a 10-year position in one of the university hospitals, which is really what I wanted to be. I didn't want to go to some district general hospital in the countryside. So that's really why I was looking at the US, because I had, if as you correctly pointed out, I thought I had the ticket, which is the green card. But at the same time, by the way, you still had to do some, the names have changed, it's all sort of exams of entry. But then, you know, I think the opportunity, I think that came through you, if I'm correct, or Pierre Guy at the time, where it came from you. I think. Well, I tell you what, I was actually going to Scotland. I was supposed to be going to working for David Carter at the time, and there was a job for me, and I had that job, and something went wrong in the number and the allocations. And I remember then calling you to say, listen, you were at this stage in London.
Yep.
And I said, listen, something's gone wrong here. And sadly, the slot I had to be given to a local person. And then you had the opportunity for me to come. And I had to do first come to the Centre Middlesex, which was a DGH, actually, in fact, very famous one in its day. Avery Jones did the first endoscopy there. I mean, that was. So I did that for a year, which I really, really enjoyed, because that would have been in the 1990, actually. That's when I moved. And the beauty there was it was a DGH in Park Royal. I had worked for a colorectal surgeon called Mike Henry. He was a lovely man, very different than Tony Cleary, completely the opposite of Tony Cleary. And then I worked for another guy called Neil Menzies-Gow, who is a brilliant surgeon, may I just say. I mean, the one that I really enjoyed working with, and I learned a lot from him. Now, if you remember, before I left, I had the fortune of being in Beaumont at that stage. No, it wasn't Beaumont, actually. It was Richmond, and laparoscopic surgery was starting. So I had some form of skill, and David Boucher-Hayes had gone to Mouret in France, the gynecologist who did the first. So we actually, in fact, Ireland was well ahead of its times in terms of doing the.
Yeah.
And I remember the laparoscope was an arthroscopy, if I'm correct. A camera was stuck to it. It was the screen, and Jim Coleman was involved in that. Anyhow, successfully, we did a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. This is after David Boucher-Hayes had a visit to Mouret in France, and he came back. And this is the vascular surgeon who really, I mean, again, it tells you something about David. He was transformative. When he sees something that creates value, he recognized it. And this was at a time where many surgeons were saying this should not be done.
Well, I was going to say, and I think a lot of surgeons were saying this can't be done. I always say there's the three stages, you know, it can't be done, it shouldn't be done, I can do that. When people, and I remember flying to Dublin because I couldn't see how it could be done.
Yeah.
And I watched David and Pierce Grace
Yeah.
doing a lap collie, and the grasping forceps was a rigid sigmoidoscopy forceps.
Yeah. Correct.
There were no such things. And then
Yeah.
you and I started. I had done laparoscopy in the 80s
Yeah.
in Leeds so I knew how to put the ports in,
Yeah.
which was a big thing, of course, in those days. And I always remember that at the time, laparoscopic cholecystectomy was an operation of private practice, because there were a lot of, and in an academic center like St. Mary's, we just didn't have the volume. And you and I decided, let's focus on the appendix and see if we can do all of these cases laparoscopically. And I vividly remember the day before going to this Surgical Research Society meeting, spending about 2 hours trying to find the appendix in a young man. And we both at that time said, you could take the colon out doing this. And we just did the next week. We did a right hemicolectomy the next week. And if you remember the paper we published in The Lancet, it was just a bunch of random cases. And we had to find a snazzy title for it, so we called it an all-comers approach, which is our way of, it was not a very thoughtful approach, but it was the beginnings. It was right in at the ground floor. And
and then I went to Centre Middlesex, and I had the free reign there, because you may not have seen laparoscopic cholecystectomies in St. Mary's because it's a teaching hospital, but I had a huge amount of volume. And the beauty about being there too is that I didn't have people like you and the professor to deal with. I just got on and did what I had to do. So it was a perfect opportunity of growing your skills, developing a center. And as you remember, then we developed a training center in laparoscopic surgery with industry partnerships, and we trained many surgeons in London and beyond who used to come on our courses. So I remember every weekend we used to welcome colleagues from across the country and train them some of the basic skills of teasing a tissue, dissecting, or even suturing.
So now, there you are in Central Mid, merrily developing your skills and your reputation. Wondering, what was the ambition then?
Well, obviously, the ultimate aim was to become a consultant, and my preference would have been to become a consultant in a teaching hospital. Again, you never know what's going to hit you next. And then I got the medical director, it was by the name of Nichols at the time, who was a fantastic medical leader, took me to the side at Centre Middlesex and threw this bombshell at me. And he said, listen, we are appointing a new consultant surgeon at Centre Middlesex. We really like you to get this job. So we're creating this job for you. Would you be interested in saying here? And, I would have been 32 at this stage. And the idea that someone who at least showed some regard to my skills and what I'm doing, it was a vote of confidence. And I said, yeah, why not? Absolutely. However, there's one little point. And he said, what? And I said, well, I haven't really finished my training program. I don't have the certificate. What's it called? The CCST used to be called in those days. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, yeah. But you have to remember, in those days, this would have been around 2001, 91, 92, 91, 92.
Yeah.
It would have been Margaret Thatcher government days. Ken Clarke was the health minister.
And
he just did the trust, NHS trust thing. In other words, give him the freedom and the independence. And he felt that he could appoint me. And I wasn't really sure about that. And to be fair to you and Pierre, you were strong advisors at the time, where you told me, whatever you do, fine. I mean, neither of you wanted me to do that job for whatever reason. But the one message was clear: get your certificates of completion before you actually do the job. So anyhow, I went to the interview. and there was a representative from the Royal College of Surgeons of England at this thing. I was the only guy interviewed for whatever reason. Obviously, there's no one else there who could apply for an endoscopic surgical job because there weren't many trained people. I'm talking really very early on. I did my interview. It went extremely well. And in those days, with an interview, you leave the room and then they will call you back. You have to wait outside until whatever. Obviously, the college representative wasn't very happy. You can see that when there. They must have had some bust up before even I went in. Anyhow, they called me back in, and the CEO at the time and the medical director, in front of this guy, said to me, "We're delighted to tell you that you've been unanimously, with the exception of one or two, been appointed as a consultant here." And that's when I threw the monkey back and I said, "This is fantastic news. I'm absolutely delighted, but I need to tell you that I need to complete my training at St. Mary's Hospital until I get my certificate before I could actually join as a consultant." I mean, the one thing I did not want to do, although it's an amazing opportunity to be appointed at a young age, but I didn't want to give anyone the opportunity of being critical that I've taken a consultant job without actually full accreditation. So that was a learning. I have an amazing letter actually from Terence English, who was the president at the time. It is framed. I don't know if he's still with us or not. It's framed, giving me very clear advice of what I should be doing. I never even responded to him.
I remember it. I'm not sure that the professor at the time gave the matter a huge amount of thought, but I do remember myself aggressively recommending that you don't take the job because I thought not one of my better judgments. I thought you would never leave there and never amount to anything. But we'll pass over that and try and rewrite.
But it's good. That's the first time I hear you admit that you were wrong.
Yeah, well, you have spent many occasions reminding me that I'm wrong about various things, so I don't need to. But yeah, that was one of my dumber thoughts, that you would never leave that. So fast forward, and I heard a great phrase recently where somebody was describing where a political explosion occurred, and he said there was a shift in the geopolitical circumstances. So the shift in the geopolitical circumstances, and lo and behold, I find myself involved in your appointment as the chair. I mean, not just as an external examiner, but now. There you were, taking the chair in Imperial, a fantastic achievement. But what was your ambition now?
Now, or then?
Now you'd got the chair.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Circumstances, geopolitical shifts. You'd taken the chair. There you were, sitting in the office that used to be next door to the one you were in. You were in the main office. Now, what was your ambition?
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting time again. I'll go to some of the highlights of that time. So this would have now been 90. I was appointed in 1994, by the way. I was appointed as an NHS consultant in St. Mary's. I think you jumped the gun here. 97, 94.
Mm-hmm.
And I started then as an NHS consultant, card carrying. I had an academic affiliation and an honorary senior lectureship, as you may know.
Yeah.
So then go off and reach 1996. You wouldn't have been there, but you would have been in Hull at this stage.
Yeah, I was done.
1996 was what they used to call then the RAE, the Research Excellence Research Assessment Exercise. It's changed its name.
Yeah.
Now, in those days, you probably remember, Avril Mansfield became the professor.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I think the good old dean that we had in the medical school could not find any surgeons he could declare in the RAE. And then he discovered there's a guy called Darzi who actually has more papers. And so I was returned in the RAE as a category C, which is not the category A as you've been employed by the university. And that's really what gave me then an honorary chair in 1996. So I was called a professor in 96, but I was an NHS appointment with an honorary appointment to the university, which is a rarity. I don't think I remember anyone at our time at St. Mary's. And then subsequent to that, when Avril obviously was there in a transition mode, which lasted for about 4 years, even longer, the chair was advertised again, and they had all sorts of, and I kept well away from it, to be fair. I didn't apply for it, but something happened after. But then they came to me and said, we want you to apply for this. I'm not sure what the motives were. They either thought I was great or they thought I was a cheap ticket that could come in and,
it's often both, isn't it?
Absolutely. So anyway, listen, I remember my appointment was chaired by the rector, Lord Oxborough, and you had two Knights of the Realm, Alfred Cusheri and Peter Morris from Oxford. I mean, it was unbelievable. And obviously I did the interview, and then after that they called me back in and said, I've got the job. So I then became the department chair. And at that stage, by the way, the department had one professor, one senior lecturer, which is exactly where you were at the time. This would have Jerry Stansby. And I completely transformed the whole model, by the way. I did a deal with the NHS. I kept my salary, converted it into 2 senior lectureships. I converted one. We essentially had 6 or 7 senior lectureships in the department, and then built a strategy for the department, which was really based on coming back to what we talked about in shockwave literacy. You know, that's when I recognized that technology could be transformative. And I saw it in laparoscopic surgery, and I wanted to prove it in robotic surgery. And the things that worked in my advantage at the time, you probably would have been around the merger of the medical schools in Northwest London and gifted to Imperial.
Yeah.
And I was one of the few that actually crossed the park.
Correct. Yeah.
Went to Imperial, met some people there, built bridges and relationships, and they were phenomenal scientists. And that's really what helped me build the science blocks. And essentially, they're all based on convergent scientific platforms, whether it's robotics, imaging, sensing. We created the Hamlin Center, where there's Royal College of Arts coming in with Imperial. We created the Helix Center of Design, whether it's the Center for Health Policy, which was actually came much, much later when I became a health minister. And I thought, you know, clinicians need to understand what policy making is all about. So it fairly quickly moved on. And by the way, the whole of from 2000 onwards, our busiest period was robotic surgery. We were the only center in the UK for 7 years until the second robot was acquired. So we excelled on that, and we did some fantastic first new procedures, which we had the privilege of doing, and we built a very, very strong, returnable EPSRC, MRC funded research grants and programs at Imperial.
So we obviously, this conversation could last several hours because of, all the things that have happened and that you've achieved and your colleagues have achieved. But I would summarize that. One of the things that I learned from you, not necessarily have been able to replicate, but is what you said you reached across the park. But what I think you've been remarkable at is collaboration. You've always had that remarkable ability to reach out and identify experts and pick them and grab them and collaborate with them. The classic thing being going across the park. So there you are in that post. You are, in many ways, a stereotypical, archetypal, highly successful academic surgeon. You've got income from grants and fantastic output and clinical reputation. And then suddenly the world changes and has changed from your perspective as you start down the line towards what I would call, and I know you probably wouldn't use this term, but real politics, if you like, the knighthood, the minister, and then moving on beyond. So the reason I'm saying this is because at the time you were doing all of the things that you just said, the surgical body, the world of surgery, would say that's Ara Darzi, the very successful, very smart academic surgeon, runs a big unit. And now they would say that's Ara Darzi, and it'll be other terms, you know. So, was that how did you navigate that that change of? It doesn't really matter whether you view yourself as that; other people do. You're different now.
Yeah, listen, John, if I started thinking about what others thought about me and what
Oh,
I
sure.
did, I wouldn't have got anywhere, especially listening to surgeons. So let me start with listen, the knighthood was given to you in 2002. It had nothing to do with politics. That we didn't come till about 2007 when Gordon Brown government changed, Tony Blair stepped down. And that was a completely accident. I mean, 2006, Patricia Hewitt, when was under Tony Blair, asked me to do a review of London's healthcare. And you may remember this because every 10 years, London used to get some review. And it was mostly about number of beds, number of hospitals, number of doctors, number of nurses. Anyhow, I did this review, which was really based on pathways of care from the cradle to the grave and how could we really come back to what I do, innovation. How could we bring innovation to transform these pathways of care? So I did this, and it just happened by accident. The Prime Minister in waiting, if I could use that word, decided that he wants to go on a health visit. Somehow the other Department of Health said, oh, you better go and see Darzi, who's doing this London review. So he goes in the back, and that's Gordon Brown. Never met him, never seen him. And I gave my talk. It was a very unique review, by the way, because I had 100 patients, members of the public and patients with me throughout this whole year, trying to redesign pathways of care. And he was sitting in the back making notes. And then he stood up and left an hour and a half later. So I never really said hello to him or goodbye to him. And it would have been about 6 weeks later, I got this phone call to say, from the Treasury, to say, the Chancellor wants to see you. And I really thought he wants to talk to me about the costings of the London Review, because he's the Chancellor. And I got there and I sit down with him. He was exceptionally charming. Whatever you hear about Gordon Brown, on a one-to-one, he was really charming, very high, really intelligent, and sat down and talked to me about different things. He knew all about me, he knew all about Imperial. He knew all about robotic surgery and everything. And then that's really when he threw this thing at me to say, listen, I want you to become I'm appointing 4 experts in their fields to become ministers in departments who could really bring their expertise into reform. And that was health.
They were called, weren't they?
Yeah, no, they call it the Government of All Talents.
Yeah.
Goats, yes, absolutely. So I was the health goat. And anyhow, this is not on the public record, but obviously that's not what my plans were. I said no, and I'm not going to go through some of the, this dragged on for about 2 weeks until I agreed to do it because, a couple of people took me aside, not to be mentioned, and said, listen, when the Prime Minister asks you to serve, it's Her Majesty's, you're serving Her Majesty's government. That's his duty to do that. I've never heard that before, but anyhow, so I did it. And that was a huge sacrifice, by the way, because you lose all your income and you're paid in a small amount. So that was quite challenging time for us in terms of the kids and everything else. But and I must say, as always, if you plan to be straight, work on evidence, contribute, avoid the politics, you're in a safe zone. And I enjoyed it. I learned huge amounts from it. And I left it with amazing. Obviously, I left in 2009 summer. I didn't want to get dragged into elections and things like that. And I had a fantastic time and an amazing learning, really. All the stuff that we criticize as
very true. It's very true, Ara. But the fact is, and you did survive, obviously, very successfully. But as you say, if you do, but you can't do those things. You can't completely avoid the politics. You can't completely. I remember you telling me at the time that you had a plan in terms of not staying too long, as you just pointed out,
Two
for
years. 2 years.
those reasons. But I mean, how did you find? Were you just, I'm terrible at that type of thing, as you well know. You've told me often enough. But you are. Did you just find you were good at that?
Yeah, you see, the difference between me and you is that you cannot resist offending people. That's your most powerful attribute. I do it the other way around, if I could just say that. When you stand up and someone calls you, the right honorable, about to deliver a speech, and let me tell you a little story about that, which just to reinforce that what I did was, so I was asked to lead the Human Fertilization Embryology Bill, and for a number of reasons. One was I was a clinician and a scientist. Now, I knew nothing about the subject matter, but I had to learn fairly quickly, because you look a complete fool, by the way, standing in the House talking about something that you don't know anything about. So I was learning as I went through that journey. And it came to the Lords, not the Commons, because it had a lot of emotional stuff, by the way, ethical issues, embryo research. In those days in the US, they just banned everything. So for us, it was an opportunity of growing the science base. Anyway, there's something called second reading. What that means is that the minister stands up, gives the speech. It's about 15 minutes. You have to read it word for word because it's a legal document. You can't just wander like you speak, John, intermittently, go sideways. So I read this thing and I sat down. This 3 o'clock, 8 o'clock, someone stands up. I'll tell you, this is a fantastic story, because this guy stood up. He was the most eloquent speaker I've ever heard, and he was Irish, and he was very eloquent speaker. But he completely destroyed the whole bill and my speech. And that is much more painful than someone shouting and screaming at you.
Yes.
It's done very. Anyway, he sat down, and then some Baroness Paisley stood up to speak. I'm not going to even make a remark about her speech. As she was speaking, I heard a big bang in the chamber, and I see people leaving the chamber. And I just couldn't believe this, and I turn around, and this is in the public record, Lord Brennan had collapsed. So I go up there. Suddenly, I find myself in an empty chamber, a couple of ushers, BBC cameras are still on, and I have someone collapsed on the floor. So I had to push him on the floor, get the red benches off the way, so I could start resuscitating him. And the last time I resuscitated someone would have been as a senior house officer in St. Vincent's Hospital in Dublin.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, so mouth to mouth, and nothing happened. And then I asked for a defibrillator. Guess what? There was apparently another peer previously who sadly had died, and then the tragic fact is that individual had donated a defibrillator.
Defib, yeah.
I shocked him. I got him back very quickly. And just to finish the story, he came up 2 weeks later. He was extremely grateful, thanking the whole house for all their wonderful notes. They sent him something else, he said, which was interesting. And he said, let me avoid the religious joke, but he said, I want to tell the house, and I've done my research from Hansard and others. This is the first time ever in the history of the house that we've had a health minister that has saved a single life. So that for me was it. And then after that, by the way, I must say, they're all been brilliant with me. I've never been seen as a politician. Listen, medical politics, could I just say, and I've been through both sides, could be much more nasty than what you see in real politique.
Yes.
At least in politics, you can stand up in a chamber and defend yourself or defend what you've done. So I enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong. It was a terrifying experience, but once you're in it, you understand how it works. I enjoyed it.
So, Ara, I think that's a natural break in your career, if you like. You've now, in the some approximately 20 years ago, that happened, and we'll come back on another day to discuss the last 20 years of your career. But in the meantime, I want to ask you some simple questions that maybe you can answer me very briefly, because I'm not going to give you time to answer these in the in the voice of a politician. I need you to answer these in the voice of a normal person. So, what's your greatest extravagance?
Oh, you have to think about these things. I mean, no one asks
Oh
you
no,
these.
you don't. You don't. You're not allowed to think about them.
You know what I think about it? Well, I love cars. I bought a few cars, which I probably, if reflect on that, was that the wise decision? No, but it's great fun and I've enjoyed it and I love them.
What's your favorite of your group?
What do you mean? What group?
What's your
I belong
favorite
to many groups.
your favorite car that you?
Oh, the classics, early 50s,
If
and
if
obviously,
you had to go out on a summer day today and drive a car from your little garage, what would it be? Your favorite?
uh, probably would love to drive a 300 SL. Yeah.
Yes, many people, with or without the roof.
Without the roof.
Yes, so with the roof's a bit hot, isn't it? What's the best piece of advice you ever got?
Uh, Take risk, uh, be brave, and follow your instinct.
Favorite movie?
Godfather,
Favorite album?
Pink Floyd,
Which one?
uh, all of them.
Okay, that's a Donald Trump answer, that, which is your favorite. And I know you're a bit of a fan of Mike Oldfield, if I recall correctly.
I was, yes, yes, absolutely. But if I'm low, I'll go to Pink Floyd.
I also remember that you used to be an enthusiastic amateur chef. So what's your favorite meal out?
Uh, French,
Do you still cook?
yes, I do. If I find cooking one of the few things that switches me off completely.
Yeah.
And also it's not that far from surgery. When you're operating, you essentially focus on one thing and one thing only. All your distractions disappear, even if there are people opening doors, closing doors, anaesthetist talking to someone else. But cooking is a very, very therapeutic thing to do.
I found doing this stuff the same, as in if you're traveling at 175 miles an hour, there's not a lot of opportunity to think about problems at work. Well, I think that's a very good moment to stop the first part of our conversation, and we'll come back another day and talk more about your life after the minister. It's instead of yes minister, it'll be no minister, and life after that. But in the meantime, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope we'll see you again before long.
Thank you, John. I enjoyed it too, and you've mellowed.
That's
Take care.
very kind of you.